I'm Larry Coogee, Vice Chair of the Johnson County Task Force on Aging, and I want to welcome everybody here today. Today we're going to have a forum presented by two people who have been involved with who are currently involved with the Olmstead Task Force, and they're going to explain a little bit about the Olmstead Task Force. First, we have Dawn Francis, who is chair of the Olmstead Task Force. And we also have Harry Olmstead, no relation to the person who was involved with the Olmstead case, but it's quite ironic that that's the case. But Harry is a member of the task force and also a longtime advocate here in Johnson County and well-known concerning disability rights and those kinds of issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn, who's going to give us a little bit about the history of the task force, a little bit about the Olmstead lawsuit that this all arises out of. It's a Supreme Court case back in 1999. And then Harry's going to give us some background as far as the efforts that the task force is having here in Johnson County as well as elsewhere. So with that, Dawn, take it away.
Thank you very much. My name is Dawn Francis, and I am the current chair of the Iowa Olmstead Consumer Task Force. I am also the executive director of the Iowa Statewide Independent Living Council. And for those of you who may not know what that is, it is a federally mandated governor-appointed council that works to promote independent living for people all across the state. So that fits really well with what Olmstead is all about. So I'm going to start out by doing a little bit of background on the Olmstead decision. It was a Supreme Court decision on June 22nd, 1999. It was Olmstead versus LC and EW, which were the initials of the two ladies that were filing the lawsuit. They were from Georgia. And they were determined that they were ready to leave a state psychiatric hospital, but they refused being released because the state had no community living options available to meet their needs. Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson were their names. They had both spent the majority of their lives living in institutions, but even after their treatment teams agreed that they could be released, the state refused to make that option available to them because there was no place in the community that they could go. The Atlanta Legal Aid Society agreed to help them file a lawsuit to enforce their rights, and thus became Olmstead Supreme Court case. And here's a picture. Sue Jameson was their legal aid attorney, and then Elaine and Lois. They both found new homes and enjoyed living in the community as a result of their lawsuit, which obviously they won. Elaine was had an active life and developed speaking and advocacy skills and inspired others until she passed away in 2004. Lois moved into a group home and reconnected with her family and made new friends, and she has found success as a folk artist. She travels and speaks about her experiences, saying, "I want to tell everybody so people can get out." I think it's important that people understand that the Olmstead decision is a decision and not an act. It is a decision interpreting the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the ADA is a law, and the Olmstead is a decision. So Title II of the ADA requires that government programs and services be delivered in a way that does not discriminate against people with disabilities. Oops, sorry. I think we're missing something. The ADA requires that states administer their programs, their services, and activities in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of qualified individuals with disabilities. The ruling also clearly states that unnecessary segregation of individuals with disabilities is discrimination that violates the ADA. Unnecessary segregation can occur when people with disabilities have no other option than to live in an institutional facility in order to receive the services and treatment they need. Here are some words of wisdom from the Olmstead decision. This is actual wording from the decision. Confinement in an institution severely diminishes the everyday life activities of individuals, including family relations, social contacts, work options, economic independence, educational advancement, and cultural enrichment. Who is affected by the Olmstead decision? All individuals who are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, children, adults, and elders, individuals with all types of physical and mental disabilities, including mental illness. Everyone deserves to live a life fully integrated in the community of their choosing. How individuals live and have the opportunity to make personal choices in any type of setting is equally as important as where they live. If individuals choose to live in traditionally institutional facilities, they still need opportunities to be part of the larger community and need the freedom of making personal choices in their everyday lives. It is about choice and community. Individuals who choose to live in the community settings can still remain isolated and segregated from community life if they don't have access to the services and supports they need to be actively involved with people, local events, and activities available to everyone else. As a result of the Olmstead decision, each state must work to make community living options available to individuals who want and can benefit from them. States have an obligation to present each individual with a full range of appropriate service options and to assure that each individual's rights and personal preferences are respected and supported. Here are some Iowa milestones. In 2000, Iowa responded to Olmstead. Governor Tom Vilsack called for a statewide steering committee to develop an effectively working plan to eliminate barriers to community living in Iowa. In 2001, the Iowa Olmstead Real Choices Task Force educated Iowans about the Olmstead decision and sent the governor the Iowa Plan for Community Development. And the current Iowa Olmstead Consumer Task Force used to be called the Iowa Olmstead Real Choices Task Force. In 2003, Governor Vilsack issued Executive Order 27 that required state agencies to develop action plans to eliminate barriers to full community participation for Iowans with disabilities. It requires the task force to advise the governor on workable strategies to eliminate barriers. In 2004, the Department of Human Services begins working on developing the Consumer Choices option. That option offers home and community-based service waiver participants more flexibility and personal control over their own budgets and service plans. The actual rollout of the community choice option did not happen until 2007. So that was 3 years later. It took 3 years. In 2005, the Iowa legislature passed the Iowa CARE Act. This expanded Medicaid through Iowa CARE, and it expresses legislative intent to expand choices by improving access through the home and community-based services waivers. In 2006, expansion of mental health services occurred. A new children's mental health waiver allowed families to get the help they need for their children at home without giving up custody. And HCBS services habilitation for adults with mental illness was incorporated into the state Medicaid plan. In 2007, Iowa implemented a children's mental health system of care in Northeast Iowa. This lays the foundation for statewide improvements in children's mental health and focused on keeping families together and kids at home and in school. In 2008, we had the Money Follows the Person initiative in Iowa, and that began moving people with intellectual disabilities from the state resource centers and other intermediate care facilities to the community of their choice. Major workforce capacity issues led to contract with web-based College of Direct Support, and unfortunately, we still are having a huge problem with workforce capacity for people. In 2009, Iowa begins work to create real opportunities for integrated employment. Competitive employment as the preferred option and expected outcome of employment services for people with disabilities and mental illness. State agencies and many partners still work on provider education, policy alignment, and on changing expectations. In 2010, the state renews its commitment to Olmstead principles in the development of a new DHS state mental health and disability services plan. There was substantial task force involvement in the development of that plan, and it created a comprehensive cross-agency framework. The DHS State Mental Health and Disability Service Plan goals are creation of welcoming communities, improving access to services, building community capacity, enhancing quality, and ensuring accountability. In 2011, the Iowa legislature initiated mental health and disability services redesign. Stakeholder work groups were convened, and they made recommendations on regional administration, uniform core services to be available statewide, eligible criteria for children and adults with mental illness, intellectual disabilities, and brain injuries, and changes to the judicial commitment process. In 2012 and 2013, we had the passage of system redesign legislation that incorporated the majority of work group recommendations. This affirmed redesign must be consistent with Olmstead principles. It continued input by stakeholder work groups. The regions were to be fully operational by July of 2014, which I believe they were. And there were still some funding questions at that time that remained unresolved. And as you all probably know, we still have funding issues. In 2013 and 2014 was the implementation of the Affordable Care Act in Iowa. This was Medicaid expansion per Governor Branstad's approach. There were issues in Iowa's enabling legislation, the Section 1115 waivers implementing expansion, and Iowa's essential health benefits. In 2013-2014, we have implementation of the Affordable Care Act. I guess this is continued, I'm sorry. Medicaid expansion has complicated mental health and disability services redesign funding. The redesign and Affordable Care Act implementation have generated strong advocacy partnerships. We are more united than ever because the Affordable Care Act has created a lot of problems in Iowa. The battle to expand home and community-based services. You know, without having those waivers, people are at risk of institutionalization. There are a lot of people on those waiver waiting lists that are waiting for services, and we don't know how many of those had to be institutionalized because they couldn't get the waiver services because nobody's keeping that data. The waiver list can be 2 years long. Some of them are longer, particularly the physical disability waiver wait list. The Iowa commitment under its BIP grant is to expand home and community-based services to more than 50% of all long-term care spending by September 15th, and that was back in 2014, I think. And in 2013, there was veto of money to reduce the waiting lists, and the task force has done a lot of advocacy around this to try and get more funding to eliminate those waiver waiting lists. Other big issues that are on the Olmstead Task Force list is, you know, looking at that whole idea of integrated setting. We've had some rulings that have come out on that now that have kind of, you know, reconfirmed that, but I think there's still somewhat of a struggle with implementation of that. And there is no community living without affordable, accessible housing, so we are still really limited in the affordable, accessible housing piece. What's been happening to the consumer choice option? You know, we're hearing stories from all over that people on the community choice option, you know, as well as some of the other programs are getting cut back by the MCOs, the Medicaid managed care organizations, on the number of hours they're allowed to have. which puts a lot of people at risk. If you're, I have a number of friends who are quadriplegic in a chair. And when you're quadriplegic in a chair, you can't get out of bed by yourself in the morning, and you can't get back in bed by yourself, and you also, you need that help 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in addition to your personal grooming assistance that you need. And some of those people are getting hours cut, and it's really putting them at risk to maybe having to go into an institutional setting. There was also the fuel pump accessibility legislation. One of our members of the task force, Gary McDermott, who is a veteran, a paralyzed American veteran, and he lives in Clinton, has been working for 3 or 4 years now with me and some other folks on trying to get accessibility legislation at the fuel pumps. He won a lawsuit against Come and Go, which required Come and Go in all states, if they are remodeling or building new facilities, that they have to make at least one fuel pump accessible, where you pull up and the driver from the driver's side window can push a big button. Has to be big with a closed fist, because some people don't have finger dexterity even if they drive, and that would alert the people in the store to come out and that they need help pumping gas. And, I have great stories. Gary has videotaped stuff. He was coming back. He had come to Des Moines from Clinton, and we met with some legislators to talk about, this is about 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, to talk about this refueling legislation. And we're just kind of hitting a brick wall with moving it. We had people that were supportive, but then Gary drove back that day to Clinton and almost ran out of gas. He went to, I think, 3 different gas stations in Iowa City that didn't have an accessible pump. So he honked and he honked and he honked. No one would come out and help him. He finally found the Hy-Vee in Iowa City, which of course has been accessible, and they did that voluntarily about 4 or 5 years ago. So he was able to get refueled, but he almost ran out of gas and he was panicking. So that just made him even more angry when he got home, thinking, I was just in Des Moines to try to solve this problem, and we're not getting anywhere. Okay, for further information, you can contact me. This is my email address, dawn@iowasilk.org, all small letters. And I also do I have a statewide email distribution list that I send out a lot of action alerts and information that's good. So if you would like to be on that email distribution list, please feel free to shoot me an email, tell me your name and give me your email address, and I'll be happy to add you to that. Were there any questions on the history?
If you have questions, I would ask that you come up to the microphone to ask them so that your voice can be heard on the audio tape. I do have one quick question. Dawn,
over there.
He's got a mic.
Thank you, Harry. I got a mic here. I can stay. Okay. Technicality, I guess. Dawn, the task force, what's the composite? Where the members of the task force, are they members of the disability community? Are
Yes.
the government agencies that are involved? Could you give us a little bit of an idea?
Sure. There's an executive order, but the majority of the members of the task force are people with disabilities, and based on the executive order, there are various different categories that we have to fill. We have to have, someone from, aging, someone that has had lived experience in an institution, someone who's a parent of someone with a disability, and then actual consumers. So it's a wide range, and people are from all over the state of Iowa. And, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we like to invite people to apply to be on the task force. So if you have an interest, we are going to be needing to fill some positions come this July, I believe. So you can email me, and I can tell you, where to go. I don't have unfortunately, the address on where to apply with me, but it's usually easier so people don't have to write it down. Just shoot me an email, and I can get that to you. And then I also wanted to mention too, in terms of what's going on at the federal level, with gutting the Americans with Disabilities Act, which, remember, the Americans with Disabilities Act is what the Olmstead decision is based on. So our ADA is being gutted, or they're trying to gut it at the federal level, and the House passed H.R. 620 on February 15th. And if passed into law, this bill would create a significant obstacle for people with disabilities to enforce their rights under Title III of the ADA to access public accommodations, and would impede their ability to engage in daily activities and participate in mainstream society. The bill is supported by businesses that sent a letter in to legislators about this, and these businesses feel they've been hurt by a loophole that punishes them for not being compliant with the ADA nearly 28 years after the enactment. So they've had 28 years to come into compliance, yet they're the victim. Yeah, can you tell I'm a little angry about this? Yeah. Their letter states, "We support the spirit and intent of the ADA, and our members strive to remain fully accessible so that all of our customers and guests can enjoy a full range of services and amenities." Well, that's nice lip service, but, you know, they still need to come into compliance. What's being proposed in this bill actually harms millions of people with disabilities living in America by weakening their civil rights and punishing them for the awful actions of a few attorneys. And this was really based upon all the what they call drive-by lawsuits that attorneys have been filing when people find a business isn't, you know, accessible. And it's not the people with disabilities that are creating the problem, it's these attorneys. But we're going to penalize the people with disabilities. The House passed bill does the opposite of its intent. It places a new burden on individuals with disabilities who must now prove the denial of access and add significant barriers to the process. The United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division agrees, and they did an analysis of H.R. 620 that was sent to Congress. This legislation extends the process by adding steps aimed at eliminating the unintended consequences of drive-by lawsuits, which will delay true access to those the ADA is intended to protect by, number one, removing the incentive for businesses to comply with the ADA, number two, requiring a person with a disability to file a written notice specifying the exact ADA provisions that are being violated, and number three, giving the business owner 60 days to acknowledge the notice and 120 additional days to begin to fix the violation, a total of 180 days or 6 months to deny access. And they've had 28 years already, and now we want to add on another 6 months for them to come into compliance with what's already in the law. The Americans with Disability Act includes education, training, and technical support provided at no cost by the Department of Justice and the regional ADA centers across the country. There are multiple disability organizations around the country that will assist with creating an accessible facility and/or business. Some do this important training for free, others will do it at a nominal fee. They do this not only to ensure the rights of people with disabilities as users or customers, but also in the hopes of providing employment for the community. A person with a disability is unable to work in any business that is not accessible for entry, lacks ability to function to high shelves, or has barriers to paths of travel inside or to essential needs such as restroom facilities. So anyway, I won't go on any more about that, but you get the idea. So I would encourage everyone to please contact your legislators and tell them no to H.R. 620. We don't want our rights rolled back. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Harry, and he's going to talk about what some of the highlights of what the task force has been doing over the last year with different legislation, particularly the Medicaid modernization that's been going on in Iowa.
Okay, before I get into that, I want to make sure we recognize that our coordinator, Caitlin Owen, is up here with us today, and also one of our other task force members, Bruce Tigg. Bruce, is here. So we appreciate them coming and supporting us. I guess what I want to do is, first of all, as you were listening to the presentation, I hope you all saw that the Olmstead decision included people that are elderly. And that's really important for us to recognize, because there are many benefits that the elderly can have. And there are concerns. I recently was in the hospital, and when I was discharged, they wanted me to go to a rehab or a nursing home facility. And I refused. There was no way I was going to go, because there are cases where people get put into the nursing home being told, oh, a few weeks, a few months, you'll go back home. And it doesn't happen. And it's more costly for the government to keep a person in a nursing home than it is for community home-based services. So if you find yourself in that position, take and make sure you're strong to say, no, we have to have other options, and look at those options. We've been very active with the task force committee on Medicaid privatization, and I don't think I'm saying anything new here about that, because probably all of us are recipients in some degree. I've been the co-chair of the task force subcommittee for Olmstead on Medicaid privatization. Some of the inroads that we've made is, first of all, we met with our director of Human Services, Department of Human Services, Foxhoven, and to let him know about Olmstead and what we're doing, as well as hear from him and how the state can work with us. We've met with other leaders from the MCOs, the managed care organizations. We met with two of the organizations. One we still haven't met with. And as you know, there are only two left. But one of them that left, we had already met with. So that's why we still have another one to go. The focus on those meetings were the integration and learn more how the task force can be a resource to help the MCOs promote community living. And that's what we're all about, is promoting community living. We reviewed the managed care RFPs and initial contacts and advocated for the inclusion of clear language that promotes community inclusion and high-quality support for people with disabilities. This included submitting questions about the RFPs, researching and promoting best practice is managed and how it's managed in other states, and submitting to DHS and CMS, which is the federal level, information to them at both the state and the federal level, and advocate for education. I want to talk about the Affordable Care Act, because that also plays a significant role in what we're talking about. We've advocated for Medicaid expansion in Iowa years ago when the ACA was first passed. Most recently, we strongly advocated at the federal level for the ACA to remain intact and provide education to legislators on how vital Medicaid is for people with disabilities and for their families. Strongly advocated against per capita caps and block granting Medicaid. That's one of the things that the government's been talking about, is taking block grants to pay for it. The home community-based service waivers has some waiting lists. The only ones that do not, that I'm aware of, have waiting lists are those for the elderly and those for HIV/AIDS. There are no waiting lists for those. But if you're talking about brain injury or other physical disabilities, they have very long waiting lists. Okay, we advocate for adequate funding and infrastructure at the regional level to provide core and core plus services. Consumers should have access to care regardless of type of disability. The legislature in 2012 began the process of transforming Iowa's mental health and disability services from a system run separately in each of Iowa's 99 counties to one run by groups of counties called regions. I also serve on the State Mental Health Council, and this has been a significant concern because right now we're 49th in the nation when it comes to delivery of mental health services. We have people that are turned away at hospitals because there are no beds available, or they have to wait there several days in the emergency room before they can get a bed open. And I personally know of a case of a gentleman that is in the psych unit at University Hospital. He's been there over a year because they cannot find adequate housing for him to go back into the community. And you can imagine what the cost of keeping a person for a year at University Hospital or any hospital is. It also changed the sources of funding so all non-Medicaid services are covered by the region, while all Medicaid expenses are covered by a combination of state and federal dollars. This major system redesign was meant to promote equal access to services regardless of where a person lives in the state and improve the quality of care provided by additional provisions are needed to make this a reality. Right now, as of last Friday when the second funnel group was released, one of the bills, Senate bill and House bill that is there that did come out of the funnel to be voted on is for the MCOs to take and pay in a timely manner their providers. One of the problems we're having is we're losing providers. There's nursing homes that are talking about closing their doors. There are doctors that will no longer take Medicaid recipients because they can't afford to. I know of a case where a nursing home ended up having to go to the bank and borrow money just to pay salaries, pay the payroll, because the money wasn't coming in as fast as it was going out. So I highly recommend that you talk to your legislators, our senators, or our representatives, and encourage them to pass legislation that takes and makes it more stricter, I guess I'd say, for the MCOs to take and provide the service they're supposed to provide. Because this was not done up front when we started privatization, and we're in this, folks. And the only way we're going to get out is by legislation.
We did have a real interesting conversation at the last Olmstead Task Force meeting. Was it last Friday? Di Finley came from she's Iowa Caregivers Association. Because as you all know, we have a real shortage of direct care workers throughout Iowa, not just in the rural areas, but in the city areas as well. And there's a lot of people, like I said, that rely on that. Though particularly those people that have to have someone there at least twice a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And you know, my thought on the whole thing is, you know, we aren't going to be able to increase the workforce unless we increase the pay that were given to those folks. And the only way that that's going to happen, those folks are funded by different funding sources depending on the program that the consumer is on. I think we're going to need to go in and look at each of those funding streams and identify the funding streams and identify how to go in for each funding stream and raise the cap for what we're able to pay people. A piece of it too is talking maybe with the legislature about creating a program for direct care workers where the state would supplement and pay their health care insurance premium. That would also be a big attractor. But, you know, it's not just going to be by us trying to recruit more people to the field. We have to go in and make those changes to salary and maybe look at benefits. And so I think Di kind of looked at that and is going to, I think, be pulling some folks together to look at that because, you know, unless we change the way the funding streams come down and what the funding streams allow, it's not going to change. And people can go to McDonald's and work and make more money, and that's just sad.
You're probably sitting out there thinking, I don't need this. I'm healthy. I don't have to worry about this. But that can change overnight for any of us. I didn't expect to go in the hospital a couple of weeks ago, but I had to go. But I'm glad that I have the provisions that the Olmstead Consumer Task Force has been fighting to have. I think it's important to recognize that one of the things that the task force also has been supporting is an increase in funding to reduce the waiver wait lists because they're so long. We talked about affordable housing earlier. In Johnson County, we have a task force coalition that is working on affordable housing throughout the county. And if you have time or energy and want to, see me and I'll show you how you can become involved in that, because this is a concern in our communities that there isn't really affordable housing. Mm-hmm. And even more than that, it's accessible housing. When I came here 18 years ago, I was unable to find a place that was accessible and affordable. So, yeah, I can talk from personal experience about this. We also support updating federal requirements that have caused states to have an institutional bias. And I think I'm going to stop there. Anything you want to add?
Well, I just wanted to go back for a moment to the direct care workforce issue. You know, I don't know how many people in Iowa we have lost, in other words, who have died because they didn't have access to be able to find someone to come in and do their home care. And one that's very near and dear to my heart is Terry Cunningham from right here in Iowa City. And Terry was hospitalized, and he was going to be allowed, you know, supposedly to go back home, but he could not find a direct care worker. You know, he was a person that needed somebody at least twice a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So he gave up. And how many other people, you know, we all know, you know, those of us who know Terry know his story, know what happened. But how many people did this happen to that we don't know about? So that's a downer. Sorry.
Thank you.
So do we want to maybe open it up for
Let's open
questions
it up
now?
for questions at this time.
Yep, that sounds good. Again, if you have questions, I'd like you to use the mic. Unless it's my question, now I'm going to use it.
Okay, Derry.
So with that, if you have questions.
Leading us off today will be Bob Welsh.
3 questions, and one has to do with Terry Cunningham. Just before Terry died, he was here in this room, and one of the questions he asked Director Palmer from the Department on Human Services was, are we going to have to sue the state for noncompliance to the Olmstead decision? And so I guess my question to the two of you is, do you think Iowa is complying with the Olmstead decision? And if not, why do you not activate a suit to sue Iowa?
Well, I think a lot of us feel that the state is not in compliance with Olmstead. And Disability Rights Iowa did file a lawsuit. They lost, unfortunately. So I don't know what the next step is on that. I have not had a chance to talk to Jane, but I know that they are still collecting stories and trying to figure out what to do next.
And I should mention that there are several websites or Facebook sites that deal with this. MCO Watch is one of those that people post their concerns, their interests, what have you. I also want to mention that our new director, Foxhoven, has not been yet
Confirmed.
confirmed, thank you, by the legislature, a Senate and legislature. And that comes up next month. Liz Mathis, Senator Mathis from Cedar Rapids area, has been an avid fighter towards making sure that the privatization works. And in fact, we met with Liz early on with the Medicaid committee. And she has asked that if you have any concerns regarding Foxhoven, to please address them to her because they will be doing an evaluation and confirmation.
Well, one of the things I wanted to say on that too, you know, in fairness to Jerry Foxhoven, he is a state employee and he does have to do what the governor wants him to do. So, you know, some of the things that he does may not be his choice to do because of the political climate and what the department is being told they can or cannot do. So that's another piece too. You know, it goes to the point that we need to get people out this year to vote, and we need to vote people out of office that are doing harmful things to the disability and aging community. Next question, Bob.
I read in the paper that the Olmstead Task Force was concerned about the long-term care ombudsman not being able to travel. Is that, number one, is that correct? And then if it is, I kept reading in the papers about it being illegal, what they're doing. And so I looked up in the Iowa Code and I found out that one of the tasks is make non-complaint related visits to long-term care facilities, assisted living programs, and elder group homes to observe daily routines, meals, and activities, and work to resolve complaints, if any, that are identified during these visits. Are you all aware of the fact that there seems to be in the code justification for your concern?
I was not aware of that, but I'm glad you brought that up, and I think that's something we need to talk to Jane Hudson at Disability Rights Iowa about, because they're obviously, if they're not funding them in the Ombudsman's office to travel to nursing homes, they've cut the travel, so they aren't going there. They're in violation of that piece. So
Now that's
we'll have
Chapter
to follow up
4.
on that.
Yeah, 231.41, 42, 3E is what I read.
Do you want to maybe get that information to Jane Hudson?
I can.
That'd be great.
The other, and I'll sit down. Harry sent me an interesting article entitled Care at Home, a New Civil Rights. And this is a case evidently that the lawyer that did the Olmstead decision is working on. Are you all going to take any action on that, like asking the Iowa Attorney General to indicate Iowa's support for that kind of litigation?
I'll defer that to our chair.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something that we can look at with Olmstead and see, what we can do. Is oil going to do anything with that, Bob? The older Iowa legislature?
Yep.
So we would be, wanting to collaborate with you on that?
Vice Chair, see,
Okay,
the end of the table.
all right.
Other
More
que-
questions? I guess I do have one, and, you mentioned the Department of Justice earlier, and I wasn't sure if they're supportive. I don't know whether you said they supported the change or.
No, they were against the
They were
change,
against it,
and
because
they
I
were
was gonna
trying to- Right, they were trying to tell them that they sent the information to Congress saying, this is in violation of what, yeah.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that because in a former life, I was a Department of Justice
Oh.
civil attorney, and they
Cool.
were very supportive in our efforts here in Johnson County a few years ago when there were concerns about access, sidewalk access,
Right.
and those kinds
Well,
of things.
and again,
so-
though, I want to point out, just like at the state level, it's the same at the federal level. Those federal agencies are under 45's administration, and so they're only going to be able to do what that administration is going to allow them to do. And so again, it gets down to the fact that we need to get people out and vote these people out of office that are doing the harm to our community.
Okay, besides voting, and if, let's say I have a disability, say I encounter a restaurant where I don't have access, what's the recourse? Where do I go for that? I don't want to file a lawsuit. I don't have the money to hire an attorney. They're shysters anyway. I'm an attorney, so I can say that, right?
Maybe I could speak to that because we had a case right here in Coralville a few years back, namely a restaurant, 30 Rock, or Hop, that's it, 30 Hop. And I had friends of mine that came and said, Harry, you're not going to be able to go to that restaurant and enjoy the view at the lounge at the top because there was no elevator, and it was a brand-new build. New builds have to follow ADA legislation requirements. Make a long story short, an attorney from the Department of Justice heard about it, called me up, and asked me about it. I told him what I knew. I said I'd never been there, but this is what I know. It went to, they met with the owners. They came out, they looked at it, they met with the owners, and it wasn't just the fact it was an elevator missing. It was the fact that some of the doors weren't wide enough for wheelchairs. Doors were too heavy, so you had push buttons. The handlebars on doors and the faucets weren't accessible for people with dexterity issues. So they came to a resolution that they had to go in front of a judge, and the resolution was that they got fined $17,000, and every 8 months they have to submit a report to the Department of Justice. If they fail to submit that report, their fine goes from $17,000 to $130,000. That's a good incentive to get that filed. So they mean business. And
So have they made any of the changes that they need to make? I mean, rather than fining these businesses, why don't they just say, make the changes?
Yeah, they are making changes. One thing I did find out in all that was that architects are not legally responsible to design buildings with ADA accessibility unless the owner of the building wants it. And I find that extremely strange that their certification
Doesn't the city have to approve?
That's the other part of this, is the city planning approves the plans, and they show seen that it didn't have an elevator. It goes to the city council. City council has to give the final okay. Then at the end, when they're ready to open, inspectors from the city goes out. They say, okay, this is approved. They send it to city council for final approval.
So that's a whole nother large group that we need to educate, right?
Yeah.
But I also want to mention that if you see something that your community is doing, I was down at the courthouse the other day, and I've never really been in the courthouse. The first time I was going to hear a hearing, and I noticed that they had a brand new ramp for wheelchairs, so that when I was there before, I had to go up the driveway, and the possibility of a car hitting me, was there. They have a new ramp. I wrote to our county commissioner, county supervisors, and said thank you for recognizing that and doing something about it. Now, make the courthouse more accessible, because the jury boxes and the witness boxes in one of the courtrooms I was in was not accessible.
So if you see these things, Dawn, they should contact
Yeah,
you? Or
well, I
how
think
do they go about that?
if you see things, you need to advocate. And you need to talk to that business owner. I know I just did jury duty last year in Adel. And the Adel courthouse, the jury boxes aren't accessible for people in chairs, and I spoke up and I went and talked to the people in charge, and I said, you got to fix this. This is not okay. So now I got to go back and check to see if they fixed it. But
Under ADA, all state, federal, and local municipalities are required to come into compliance.
well, the other thing that bothered me too, though, Harry, and this is the other part I didn't tell, is that one of the reasons for excusing jurors, well, if you have a disability, that would prevent you, from serving, we can excuse you. And no. Just no.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Anybody awake?
My name is Janice Weiner. My question is, clearly public places must be ADA compliant. In this area, is it required when there's new residential housing that the housing be accessible, that the doors be wide enough, that entrances be accessible? That would seem to be, at least for new construction,
Requirement
if you
for
do
new
it at the beginning, it would seem to be a
If you're
pretty easy way
making
to
it
address
doesn't
some of these issues. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's great. I don't believe that there's a requirement that a contractor building
Not
a
private
subdivision of
housing.
houses need to,
If federal funds.
Only if it's federally
so if
funded.
it's like a public housing
right,
project
public
or
housing
something,
project,
that
yeah.
probably would have to be.
Or specific housing that's specifically funded, like when the Iowa Finance Authority gives grants to different contractors, they have requirements in there. So many of the units have to be ADA accessible. I would like to see them also make 100% of them visitable. If you move in and your neighbor uses a wheelchair and they're in an ADA accessible apartment and yours is not an ADA accessible because you don't need it, but then they can't come and visit you because maybe they can't get through the doorway or, yeah.
Now, understand, though, that if the housing code, whatever of the county you're in or city you're in requires it, then the answer is yes. I think
Right.
your answer
Yeah.
is just basically
Right.
does the ADA
In general,
require it?
right.
It just would make a lot of sense in many instances, especially when you're looking at aging in place as you look at the elderly population
Right.
as well.
Exactly.
I think one of the things is also realtors are beginning to realize that as people grow old, they don't want second floor houses. They want accessibility and are going to need that. And so more and more contractors and realtors are starting to recognize that and starting to build accordingly or sell accordingly.
we still have a long way to go on that, as well as everything else, so. And,
But we need your help.
we do. We need everybody, So in answer to your question earlier, when you see something, try to talk to the owners yourself about your concern, And then, if you don't get any result from that, then you can go like Disability Rights Iowa or Department of Justice and file a complaint. It doesn't cost anything to file a complaint.
And as far as the Department of Justice goes, they have U.S. Attorney's offices located in Cedar Rapids, which covers the northern half of the state. Johnson County is actually in the southern district, so the office would be in Des Moines as far as the U.S. Attorney's
And if you need
office.
assistance with that in this area, Leah Donald is here, and Leah, stand up so everybody can see you. Leah is the executive director of the Access to Independence of the Eastern Iowa Corridor Center for Independent Living here in Iowa City, and they serve a 7-county area, including the Iowa City and Cedar Rapids and 5 other counties besides that. So her staff would be available too to talk to you about, what you can do if you've run into an accessibility issue.
Other questions? Well, with that, we have a couple of minutes left. Would you want to, Dawn or Harry, would you like to give a final?
Well, just to invite anyone who's interested to apply to be on the task force to come work with us. Also, my organization, the Iowa Statewide Independent Living Council, is looking for new council members as well. We have 3 openings as of July. And so, again, there's my email. If you're interested in applying, email me and I'll send you the information on how to do that. Our council is governor appointed, so you have to fill out a gubernatorial appointment resume, but we do have a committee that reviews those resumes, and the council makes recommendations to the governor. We usually give a list of 10 or 12 people to the governor to choose people for the council. So we need anyone from all walks of life, disability or non-disability. If you have a passion for independent living and making things accessible for people so they can live outside of an institution, please come and join us.
And I do want to mention, these aren't monthly meetings.
Right.
They're basically
Quarterly.
quarterly meetings. And also,
Teleconference.
you don't necessarily have to go to Des Moines if you don't have transportation. You can do a phone conference call and still be a member.
Right. And also for both the Olmstead Task Force and for the Silk, we do reimburse you for your travel expenses. So for your cost of your transportation, whether that be gas or other kind of transportation to get there, we'll pay for your hotel the night before the meeting if you come in the night before, and for your dinner that night. And usually the hotel provides breakfast in the morning. And the Olmstead provides a stipend, I guess. The Silk does not. But also, if you need a personal assistant, we pay, we'll pay your hourly rate for that. So we try to make it accessible. And don't feel if you've never been on a board or a council or anything that you're not qualified. Everybody is qualified. We'll train you. We'll help you. So please, if you're interested, apply.
Yeah, look at me.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. And then I'd also like to thank Coral Vision for taping this today. And this will be made available on both City Channel 4 as well as Coral Vision, as well for those of you who could catch this at home. Or if you know somebody that's missed this and you think they would be appropriate for them, you can make that reference. They can watch it there. So thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.